Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you Dr. Tebbi for being so enthusiastic about having Shri Mani Shankar Aiyar over here for his second lecture. This is the second time that he is here at FC College. This event has been organized by the Forman Political Science Society, in particular by Dr. Ryan Brasher and his very enthusiastic team. So it's my very pleasant duty to welcome you to the 2018 Eqbal Ahmad Distinguished Lecture. Mr. Mani Shankar Aiyar is known to all of you, but before I introduce him formally, let me say that there are three excellent reasons for us to have this lecture at this time and here at Forman Christian College. The first, as Dr. Tebbi has referred to, is the fact that we are on this subcontinent, two countries, Pakistan and India, whose destinies are tied up with each other, neither can move away, and yet our relations are bad and have been bad for the last several years. In fact, earlier on, in earlier decades, there were a lot more voices for peace. Today, there are fewer because of the growing religious nationalism in both countries. And so it is ever more important that we have here and in all of Pakistan those who speak about the need to speak about peace. It's highly appropriate that this meeting, this lecture, should be taking place in Forman Christian College because this is where Eqbal Ahmad received his education between 1952 and 1954. Very few people over here know that, although I'm sure that quite a lot of people have heard the name, but even if they have not, let me tell you a little bit about Eqbal Ahmad. He was born in Bihar, was about 14 years old when he crossed over into Pakistan, and he saw the carnage of partition, and that put within him the desire to work for peace throughout his life. After his 2 years here at FC College, he left for Princeton University, where he decided to do his PhD on Algeria and the labor movement in Algeria. He left, therefore, for Algeria, and that was a time when the Algerians were fighting against the French for their independence. It's, I think, quite amazing that a young man who must have been just about 24 or 25 years old at that time was picked up by the FLN and made their representative at the Paris peace talks. He was arrested by the French, but eventually got out. He became an associate of the famous Frantz Fanon, and went after his PhD back to the United States. His friend, the late Edward Said, described him as the most brilliant and unusual political thinker who was the shrewdest and most original anti-imperialist analyst of the post-Cold War, of the post-war world. Eqbal is actually best known for his being the founder, or one of the founders, of the anti-Vietnam War movement in the United States. So he, together with Noam Chomsky, the Berrigan brothers, Howard Zinn, etc., was in the forefront of those who were arguing that the United States needs to get out of Vietnam. For this effort, Eqbal was put on trial by the United States government for trying to blow up the heating system of the Pentagon and the White House. It was a trumped-up charge, and it was the famous Chicago 7 trial ended with all the seven being exonerated, But this actually gave them the prominence to pursue their cause and fight for the end of the Vietnam War, which, of course, did happen and happened with the victory of the Vietnamese. Eqbal passed away on the 11th of May, 1999, in Islamabad. I don't know of any other Pakistani for whom people around the world mourn so much. He is mourned in Algeria, in Vietnam, Palestine, Algeria, and the United States. In fact, there were obituaries written of him, for him, in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the Times of India, Pakistani newspapers, Al-Ahram in Cairo, etc. He was a man very committed, very passionate for public education, in combating ethnic and religious prejudices, nationalism, militarism, fundamentalism, and other political and social movements that are based upon difference and exclusion. Since his death 19 years ago, there have been a number of Eqbal Ahmad distinguished lectures, and some of them were, among those who spoke was Admiral Ramu Ramdas, who is now one of the leading proponents of India-Pakistan peace, Najam Sethi, whose name you're familiar with, Professor Noam Chomsky of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Ahmed Rashid, Tariq Ali, Anand Patwardhan, the famous movie maker, Kuldeep Nair, and Asma Jahangir, whose reference we had in this very hall just 2 months ago. This is the second time that Shri Mani Shankar Aiyar will deliver the Eqbal Ahmad Distinguished Lecture. His first time was in 2012. I think it's very appropriate that we have him here, and we're very fortunate that he happened to be here in Lahore, and we were able to grab him. He is a man who wears many hats. He's a political leader, he's a diplomat, a very readable writer, and a peace activist. He was a member of the Congress Party until very recently and had held numerous portfolios. Earlier, he was a member of Dr. Manmohan Singh's cabinet. I think that was from 2004 to 2009. And earlier was the Minister for Petroleum and Gas in India. Now, as some of you may be aware, in December of last year, Shri Mani Shankar Aiyar had to pay the price for speaking truth to power. Due to a sustained campaign by Narendra Modi against him, he was made to leave the Congress Party. But as his writings subsequently tell us, he has not been in the least bit daunted by that. For him, Pakistan has been of outstanding importance, and he has dedicated much of his writing and his efforts for the cause of promoting peace between our two countries. And therefore, it is with great pleasure that I invite Mani Shankar Aiyar to speak to us. Thank you.
Dr. Parvez Hoodboy, Principal of Forman Christian College, Head of the Department of Political Science, the Forman Political Science Society, and all my young friends gathered here. It truly is an honor to be invited to deliver the Eqbal Ahmad Distinguished Lecture once. But I don't know how to describe being invited to do so twice. It's something of an excess. At the same time, it is quite flattering to be asked to do it. And the reason given to me by Pervez when I pointed out to him that I've already delivered the lecture and how can I deliver it again, was he said that what you said then had a resonance. What you are going to say today is a desperate need. And therefore, it is in order to confront this question in today's circumstances that I've been invited to come before you. I think I could sum up what the present circumstances are with a rather egotistic reference to myself. I referred to Muhammad Ali Jinnah as the Qaid-e-Azam in a lecture I delivered day before yesterday. And hysterical TV anchors in India have for the last 48 hours been demanding to know how an Indian who claims to be patriotic can possibly go on Pakistani soil and describe Muhammad Ali Jinnah as the Qaid-e-Azam. We've dropped to that level. I know that a lot of Pakistanis call Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi Mahatma Gandhi. Does that make them unpatriotic Pakistanis? Why have we descended to this level? The other thing that is driving at least some right-wing anchors completely crazy when there are so many other things to report is my having said that I think it was quite wrong to pull down the portrait of the Qaid-e-Azam, which has been hanging in the Aligarh Muslim University since 1938. And they seem to think that I have transgressed Mother India by saying that that portrait should not have been removed. And I've just learned that at the Gulab Devi Hospital, there's a portrait of Mahatma Gandhi up. And so I want to ask these TV anchors in India as to how they would feel if the Pakistanis were to pull down the portrait of Mahatma Gandhi. I also want to ask them, who was the person who so repeatedly referred to Muhammad Ali Jinnah as the Qaid-e-Azam that the Qaid-e-Azam sharply reprimanded him and said, please call me Mr. Jinnah. That was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the Mahatma. So it is really a very sad reflection on the state of India-Pakistan relations in the minds of the present establishment that so minor a matter as my referring respectfully in Pakistan to Muhammad Ali Jinnah as the Qaid-e-Azam should cause so much offense back home, and that my defense of the portrait of the Qaid-e-Azam in Aligarh Muslim University should be displayed before audiences running to several million as the final proof that since I have said so on Pakistani soil, therefore I must be a traitor to my nation. I don't accept any of this, and I'm not bothered by any of this. For I believe that the present situation in India is an aberrant situation. It is aberrant because these forces have existed since 1923, when the title given to Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. In 1923, a man called V.D. Savarkar wrote a book in which he invented a word that doesn't exist in any religious text in India, Hindutva. We know about Hinduism, but Hindutva was a completely new invention, and he described Hindutva as amounting to Hindu Raj. So the first proponent of the two-nation theory was the ideological guru of those who are currently in power in India. And the people of India rejected the two-nation theory for the first 65 years of their 70-year-old existence. In the last 5 years, the attempt has been made to promote the concept of India as a Hindu state, and while approximately 70% of the Indian electorate did not vote for Mr. Modi in the last election, but lost because they were completely fractionated among themselves, it is my fervent hope, and perhaps that is what results in its being my expectation, that a great number of this 70% who did not vote for the BJP in the last election will come together adequately to be able to put an end to the aberration that we have been suffering in our country. At the same time, I have to recognize that in Pakistan, you have decided to have an Islamic Republic. And this Islamic Republic exists without any consequences for us. Whatever the consequences for you may be, it makes absolutely no difference to us in India in consolidating our nationhood that you should be an Islamic Republic. And we see no reason to imitate your example by becoming a Hindu Republic. And there's a very fundamental reason for that, which is connected with one of my oldest Pakistani friends, who's sitting in the front row and was the former Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Khurshid Kasuri. On the same day, the 8th of October 1961, both of us went up to Trinity Hall in Cambridge. And after I'd put my bags in my room, I then walked down, and this young man walked up to me, and we met each other within minutes of arriving at Cambridge. And many, many, many years later, after he had achieved high distinction in India, I asked Khurshid, what made you come up to me? And his answer is engraved in my mind. He was then 20 years old. He said he came up to me because he'd never met a Hindu in his life. I said to him, you picked a very poor example, but it has rung in my mind ever since, because no Indian, I underline that, no Indian, not even Narendra Modi, can spend even 48 hours in India without meeting a Muslim, a Christian, a Sikh, a Buddhist, a Jain. It is a highly plural society. And therefore, we have long learned to live, indeed to celebrate being a society which is open to people of all religions. And that is what we call secularism. I know the word secularism in Pakistan is often associated with atheism, but our secularism is more about giving equal respect to all religions and insisting that the state must have nothing to do with the religion of the individual, for us to be able to say with pride, or at least we could do so till a few years ago, that we were a secular republic, even if Pakistan was an Islamic republic. And that is why I said that it causes no difficulty to India for Pakistan to be an Islamic republic. And I trust it causes no difficulty to Pakistan for us to not be a Hindu republic. Yet I say that with a certain element of trepidation. Because looking back at partition after 70 years, I don't see it really as the partition of India, but as the partition of the Muslim community of the subcontinent into three almost equal slices. About 200 million Muslims in Pakistan, just short of that number, about 175 million Muslims in India, and approximately 200 million Muslims in Bangladesh. A community of 600 million Muslims was divided in consequence of one partition in 1947 and another partition in 1971, into there being this community, this massive community, divided into three countries whose mutual relations have been pretty hostile. And therefore, the voice that the subcontinental Muslim ought to have had in international affairs has been split to the point where the voice has become very weak. Now, this is a situation we cannot change, but as far as India is concerned, we just have to ensure that this massive population of 175 million Muslims is fully integrated into our national mainstream. For in the 21st century, it is as impossible to conceive of India without Islam as it is to conceive of Islam without India. We have such a large Muslim population in our country that we absolutely must iron out whatever differences there might be in some minds about our Muslim past, our Muslim present, to ensure that every Indian Muslim feels respected, feels safe, feels his identity is safeguarded, feels that his property is his, feels that his life and limb are not under any kind of threat. That is the last remaining challenge of our nationhood. But it's a curious thing that while in my country, all the youth icons, almost all the youth icons, are non-Hindus. Amir Ali Khan, Salman Khan, Saif Ali Khan. It's almost impossible to have a box office hit in India without a Muslim in the lead. I want to draw your attention to a fascinating historical paradox. A young man called Yusuf Khan, Pathan, went in the late 30s, early 40s from Peshawar to Bombay and was told that he didn't have a future in the Bombay film industry unless he dropped the Yusuf Khan from his name in order to become Dilip Kumar. That was the India of the 1940s. Now, in this 21st century, we have a young man called Dilip Kumar, who was born to a Tamil family in Chennai. His father died very young, and a very generous local Muslim adopted the mother and the child decided to convert to Islam and is now known by the name of A.R. Rahman, the greatest music director we have in the subcontinent. So then Yusuf Khan had to change to Dilip Kumar. And now Dilip Kumar changes to A.R. Rahman. And that, I think, is the image of India that I would like you to carry in your hearts. And it's certainly the image of India of which I am enormously proud. But notwithstanding the progress that we have made in integrating Muslims into the mainstream of our national life, when Salman Khan says something that a few extremist Hindus don't like, they immediately say, go to Pakistan. When Shah Rukh Khan says something that they don't like, their reaction is go to Pakistan. When Saif Ali Khan says something that they don't like, these characters say go to Pakistan. The question I want to ask them is, why go to Pakistan? Why don't you say go to Indonesia? Why don't you say go to Saudi Arabia? Why don't you say go to Bangladesh? Why don't you say go to Kyrgyzstan? Why do you say go to Pakistan? For one reason and one alone. That hostility between India and Pakistan is resulting in a kind of salience in certain Indian minds between Pakistan and Muslim. And until we can definitively get rid of this salience, unless and until we can give the Indian Muslim his due place as an Indian citizen, I don't think we can move forward to the kind of India we ought to be and the kind of India we sought to be when, in 1947, on grounds of religion, a part of our conjoined country was constituted as Pakistan. That is why I regard Pakistan as much more a domestic issue in India than a matter of foreign affairs. And it is in these circumstances that I believe it is in India's fundamental national interest to come to some kind of accommodation with Pakistan. But reciprocally, why should Pakistan wish to end any hostility with India? For after all, don't forget that on the 13th of August 1947, all those who were going to become Pakistanis were Indians. And when partition took place, and the question arose as to why are you Pakistanis, they couldn't give the reason of race, they couldn't give the reason of color, they couldn't give the reason of language. Indeed, they couldn't even give the reason of religion, because while the Muslim elite of India had voted with its hands for Pakistan, the Muslim proletariat voted with their feet to remain where they were. And in these circumstances, it became absolutely impossible for us to actually have a friendly relationship, because Pakistan was defining itself negatively in terms of India. And that is why you got all those myths with which I grew up, right up till 1971. That is the first 25 years of our existence as mutually hostile neighbors. The slogan that one Muslim is equal to 4 Hindus, and sometimes that got transmogrified into one Muslim is equal to 40 Hindus, and one Muslim is equal to 400 Hindus. And then it was said that because of that, कल शाम तक लाल किले पर इस्लाम का झंडा लहराएगा. Wild applause. It was also the period when it was said कि हंस हंस के लिया था पाकिस्तान, लड़ लड़ के लेंगे हिंदुस्तान. It was the period when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto goes to the United Nations and describes India as a monster, to wild applause from the people of Pakistan. Is that Pakistan still there? I have been associated with your country one way or the other for almost 40 years. It will be 40 years this December. For 40 years, I've in the beginning lived among you for nearly 4 years, and in the last 36 years or 37 years, I've come again and again to Pakistan, at least 36 or 37 times. And the Pakistan that I had read about when I was a young man is not a Pakistan that I have ever encountered here. Why on earth have you invited an Indian, not fully an Indian Hindu, but an Indian atheist, to this forum? It's because things have dramatically changed. And one of the things I want to tell my people when I return is that when I went to the staff college at Quetta, my father-in-law's name is a Sikh, is still up there on the boards, and I was presented as a souvenir by the head of the staff college, the commandant, with a photograph of the whole panel and a close-up of my father-in-law's name. I saw the names of every single one of the earlier chiefs of army staff of India. Timaya's name is there. P.N. Thapar's name is there. All our distinguished soldiers Cariappa's name is there. They all fought against Pakistan. But no Pakistani has demanded that it is an insult to Pakistan's honor for these names to be up at your staff college. And yet there are people in India who are saying that it is an insult to India to have the portrait of the Quaid-e-Azam hanging at the Aligarh Muslim University. So there's been a huge mindset change in Pakistan. At the present moment, 95% of Pakistan's population does not define itself as being Pakistani because they're not Indian, which is what happened with the earlier generation, but define themselves in exactly the same way as an Argentinian would do, that I'm an Argentinian because I was born in Argentine. And so I am a Pakistani because you were born in Pakistan. So any need to hyphenate India and Pakistan for the definition, assertion, projection of your identity is no longer required. The whole world is familiar with Pakistan. And Pakistan is a country that, in the words of Christophe Jaffrelot, who I regard as the single most perceptive analyst of not only Pakistan but India as well, he has titled a recent book of his as The Pakistan Paradox. That's the title. And the paradox he describes as instability with resilience. Now, whatever the political difficulties you may have domestically, whatever the problems you may have with changing governments, whatever the problems you might have with constitutions which Khurshid's father writes and then get changed within, or at least all the key clauses are suspended within a few days, and the author of that constitution is thrown into jail. Despite all this, Pakistan is there. There are Indian scholars who spent a lifetime writing about the failed state, the failing state, the flailing state. But Pakistan came into existence in 1947, and thank you very much, it's perfectly fine today. So Pakistan is so well established, notwithstanding all your own difficulties, that I find it extraordinary that so many Pakistanis should think that there is a threat from India to swallow you up. We're having such difficulty integrating 175 million Muslims into India's mainstream nationhood. What on earth will we do with 200 million Pakistanis becoming Indians again? It's inconceivable. It just won't happen. It just can't happen because it would be impossible for India to swallow Pakistan and not die of indigestion. So in these circumstances, these paranoid thoughts have to be put to one side. They have to be put to one side in order that you might become yourselves again. Only very, very recently, an article by Pervez Hoodboy was rather dramatically illustrated to me on a slide at a seminar on security challenges that I've been attending at the University of Lahore. According to that chart, and I think in rather more prosaic ways in his prose, it says that your current budget has a provision of approximately 1,600... Oh, is that your article? Sorry, it's Ejaz's article in Dawn. It has a provision of $1,600 billion for defense and a provision of $28 billion for human resource development. Isn't there something skewed about this that you would like to change? And why is it so skewed? It's because India is the enemy. And I've always felt that what has thrilled me about Pakistan is that despite the education that is forced upon you at school, where you are taught how awful India is, how awful Hindus are, what a dreadful religion Hinduism is and how you have escaped from that thrall, all of you are sitting in this hall wanting to see the way forward to peace with India. Your political parties, they run through 2 elections, and if Khurshid's current party will allow it to happen, perhaps you'll soon have a 3rd democratic election. And in the previous 2, I'm allowed a joke at his expense. We've known each other for 60 years. But in the present concatenation of events, you had 2 democratic elections in which every political party other than the Jamaat-e-Islami has pledged itself to better relations with India. So clearly you don't believe your own lies. You grow up beyond them. And therefore I find a constituency for peace in Pakistan that is much larger than the constituency for peace in India. But does the constituency for peace in India not exist? It actually does. And it exists for the reason that we are we and you are you. We are we because most of India is so far away from Pakistan and has nothing to do whatsoever with Pakistan that they don't have a view on Pakistan. You go to Kerala, you go to Tamil Nadu, you go to Karnataka, you even go to Andhra Pradesh or Telangana, where Hyderabad is now located. You go all along the east coast in Odisha and West Bengal. They're very concerned about Bangladesh. But Pakistan, quite irrelevant. In Assam and the northeastern states. Even in much of Bihar, the salience of Pakistan to the Indian mind is largely confined to what is called the Hindu-Hindi heartland. And since Hindi-speaking Hindus constitute a minority of India's population, that is why our country has not had the problems that your country has had with Punjabi domination. We are all a minority, every one of us. So in these circumstances, we just have to learn to live together. Yet it is true that in those parts of India where Pakistan is on the minds of people, they do have a view. And the view that they have is that any West Punjabi going to East Punjab is hugged and kissed until he almost suffocates. I once went to Attock on the banks of the Indus, and from there I looked towards India. I looked beyond Delhi. I looked at Palwal and said, Punjab extended from Attock to Palwal. You'd have had 130 seats in a joint Indian legislature. First you broke yourselves into 2, because partition was principally a Punjabi civil war. Then in India, we broke up what remained into 3, into Himachal Pradesh, into Rump Punjab, and into Haryana. So today's Punjab has 13 seats in our central legislature. To bring yourselves down from 130 to 13 seats takes a special kind of Punjabi genius. So what we need to understand is where there is the influence of Pakistan, there's a very strong desire to meet up with Pakistanis, to resume common heritages. Because one of the great ironies of partition was that the Muslims who constituted Pakistan left behind in India most of their heritage. The Taj Mahal today, sorry, it's not yours, it's mine. The Ajmer Dargah Sharif, sorry, it's not yours, it's mine. The Nizamuddin Auliya is next door to my home, not next door to your home. The Bihar Sharif is with us. Nagur Sharif in my constituency is with me. But Nankana Sahib, with you. Panja Sahib, with you. So this division of India and Pakistan was a political division brought about by the circumstances of the time and now irreversible. But it didn't break the fundamental cultural links, or shall I say civilizational links. And these civilizational links, I think, were the consequence of the impact of Islam on the Hindu mind. Because the essential message of Islam that was brought to India in the very year or the very decade that the Hazrat Muhammad Sahib actually lived was in Kerala. The Arab traders had brought the message of Islam to Kerala, and Kerala therefore has a population that is almost exactly 1/3 Muslim. It's been there for much longer than it's been in Sindh. Just remember that. We also have the world's oldest Christian church in India, the Syrian Christian church. And when this message of Islam came to India, it was the diametric opposite of our theological perception of human life. For the message of Islam said that we are all equal. And the message of Hinduism said, on the contrary, we are all unequal because we are paying for the sins of our past life, and we should be good in this life in order to be rewarded in the next life. But that meant that the person who was discriminated against in Hindu society didn't know what he'd done wrong and didn't know what right he could do to live well in the next life, indeed whether he'd have another one. So the impact was on the mind, and we had the Bhakti movement which finally climaxed in the Sikh religion, and the impact of Islam was so strong on Sikhism that when Maharaja Ranjit Singh decided to build the Golden Temple in Amritsar, he asked a Muslim Peer to lay the foundation stone. Is there a single well-known Muslim Sufi saint whose songs and poems are not recited in India? You go to the Nizamuddin Auliya or the Nagur Sharif, how many Hindus are there? They're praying because they're allowed to come in. So in these circumstances, we have to preserve our India. And we can preserve our India because whatever the challenges you faced in Pakistan, you have established yourself as a state that cannot be overtaken. And who is this lunatic who would come across with an atom bomb in his attache case, leave it at the platform of Lahore railway station, go outside and press a button, Lahore is finished. Exactly 8 seconds later, the radiation will hit Amritsar. And 8 days later, Delhi will start going under. So in this age, for us to still talk in conventional terms, कि वो सियालकोट आएंगे तो हम उनको लाहौर तक आने नहीं देंगे. अरे जबकि हम इच्छोगिल पहुंच गए थे और पार किया, उसको पार नहीं कर पाए. So militarily we can defend each other, we can defend ourselves, but aggressively capturing the other side is impossible without cooperation from the other side. So that rules out war, remains with jaw. And I now return to my personal hero in Pakistan, who is Khurshid Mahmood Kasuri. It was a golden period between 2004 and 2008 when he was Foreign Minister of Pakistan. Alas, I wasn't Foreign Minister of India, and now I'll never be. Alas. Otherwise, we could have sat down and over a beer for myself and a lemonade for him, we could have sorted out these things. Indeed, if only he wouldn't limit himself to lemonade, I'm sure we could arrive at a conclusion even quicker. But anyway, Khurshid and General Pervez Musharraf, here in Islamabad, and Ambassador Shahid Malik, who's sitting in front of me here, he was the ambassador, the High Commissioner in New Delhi. Between these people, they decided to address what is regarded as the most knotty problem between Pakistan and India, namely the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. They didn't sit down to talk about visas or to talk about Pakistani TV dramas or to talk about Bollywood films or to talk about visas or to talk about trade. They settled down to talk about Jammu and Kashmir. And it was Pervez Musharraf, not the Indian side, that gave a name to that conclusion. It was the 4-point formula. And if only destiny had intervened beneficially instead of malefically, either Dr. Manmohan Singh's visit to Pakistan would have been preponed by a month to February of 2007, or Pervez Musharraf's quarrel with his judiciary had been postponed by 1 month to the beginning of April. Then Dr. Manmohan Singh would have arrived here, and the 4-point formula would have translated itself into a solemn bilateral agreement, not on visas, not on Bollywood, not on Pakistani TV dramas, but on Jammu and Kashmir. Khurshid has demonstrated that if Indians and Pakistanis talk, they find it difficult to not agree. So the only way of preventing an agreement with Pakistan is to disrupt the process of talking. And that's exactly what your Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed and people like that do. The minute a process begins, they find some way of disrupting it. The best is to find 10 misguided youth, send them into India, giving them promises of what is going to be provided to them in the next world. The poor guys kill themselves. They kill a few Indians in the process, but they succeed in completely bombarding the India-Pakistan talks process. And equally, this is welcomed by all those Indians who do not wish to engage with Pakistan, because that would remove their raison d'etre. If India and Pakistan were friends, then Muslims and Hindus are friends. So what's the place for the RSS? And what's the need for a Hindu Raj? So therefore their raison d'etre, their reason for being, is to have hostility with Pakistan so that they can continue their 1,000-year-old fight with Muhammad bin Qasim. They often say we want to take revenge on Muhammad bin Qasim. The Khalif took revenge on him 6 months after he returned from Sindh. He was only 17 years old, the poor boy. And those Sindhi princesses just did a Me Too on him, and the Khalif ended their lives. So what are we talking about? It is impossible to conceive of India today without acknowledging the huge debt that we owe to the Islamic influence in religious thinking, because unlike Islam, Hinduism is an open-ended religion and is open to any influence. So there's been a massive influence of Islam on Hindu thinking, and that's represented most in the Bhakti movement. But take our art. Fakir Syed Ejazuddin has spent a lifetime hiding Indian miniatures and Indian portraiture in dark rooms in the Red Fort, not what do you call it? The fort you have here. I don't know whether you call it a Red Fort. Anyway, in the fort, because he doesn't want fundamentalist elements to destroy this heritage which belongs to Pakistan. As much as the Taj Mahal is part of our heritage, the Red Fort is part of our heritage. What we see in Hyderabad is part of our heritage. All your shrines are part of our heritage. And we've learnt so much from you, and the most important thing is the way in which we've influenced each other. Just look at a world map. Wherever Islam spread, westwards, let's first take it westwards. When it spread westwards, all the way across to Mauritania, it was totally victorious. Defeat was not known to Islam, and that victory has remained consolidated for almost 1200 years now. Except when you cross the Straits of Gibraltar. And the Berber general Tariq, he crossed into Iberia the same year that Muhammad bin Qasim arrived at Thatta, 711. But unlike Qasim, who went back and suffered the consequences, he'd have been a nice Sindhi boy today if he'd remained here. But unlike him, Tariq remained, established the empire of Al-Andalus, and it lasted there for 685 years. After 685 years of Muslim rule in a large part of Iberia, there is not a single Muslim today in Iberia. Almost exactly the same thing happened in undivided India. Muhammad Ghori was invited to come to India by Raja Jayachand to chastise his son Prithviraj for having run away with his daughter Sukanya. And he won the battle for Jayachand, looked around and found there were no competitors for the throne of Delhi. So the Delhi Sultanate was established in 1192 AD. And from them all the way through to 1858, 666 years, there was a Muslim Sultan on the throne of Delhi or a Muslim Badshah on the throne of Delhi. And when in 1872, the British undertook the first demographic survey of India, it was found that the Muslims were in the minority. Only 24%. 76% of India, after 666 years of Muslim rule, remained non-Muslim. And now you look eastwards, from Bangladesh to Malaysia, to Indonesia, to the southern Philippines. Wherever Islam went, it conquered everything. And you look at the gates of Vienna or at the Ardennes the mountain regions in the Pyrenees in France. When Islam got stopped, it just couldn't move. Where it won totally. The only place where it didn't win totally and learnt how to coexist with other religions, and other religions learned to coexist with Islam, was our subcontinent. It's a matter of immense pride. And nobody thought that the Muslims were a minority in India so long as you were ruling. That thought only came up after it seemed that somebody else might start ruling. Anyhow, whatever was the rationale of partition, it has taken place, and instead of going on scratching at the scabs, as your foreign office walas and my foreign office walas, what is an Indian diplomat? He knows everything about Junagadh. What is a Pakistani diplomat? He knows everything about Mangrove. What is a Pakistani diplomat? He knows that Travancore Cochin acceded or wanted to accede to Pakistan. And what is an Indian diplomat? Kashmir hamara hai. This is not the way to move forward. Khurshid showed that if we sit together, preferably privately, talk to each other without interruption, and in front of the screen, you have President Musharraf and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh meeting here, there and everywhere, exchanging jappas and asking, Kabab Gaha Rahe Ho? That is the name of a village near Rawalpindi where Dr. Manmohan Singh was born. That set the tone outside. And then you had Khurshid, who's probably the most articulate foreign minister you've ever had or are likely to have, seizing every opportunity to explain why it was in Pakistan's interest to have a good relationship with India and what Pakistan was trying to do in this regard. And he had counterparts in India who were no match to him in rhetoric, but who also could talk much the same language, even if in different accents. But it was known all over the subcontinent and all over the world that we were trying to get together. And we almost got there. We almost got there. And those 4 points are well worth studying. And as far as I can understand, you have to leave to the Prime Minister and the President at least one point which they can resolve, because that shows that they've made a contribution too. But any attempt at peace by turning up on the Prime Minister's birthday, which in any case he's sharing with Jesus Christ, with Atal Bihari Vajpayee and with Muhammad Ali Jinnah, just turn up and you give the Pakistan Prime Minister a hug and a pat on the head to his granddaughter and say, I have brought peace, is not the way to do it at all. You have to get the professionals to work, to bake the cake, and then leave a little bit of the icing incomplete, so that when the heads of state and government meet, they can then make their contribution. So whether it should have been called a joint management exercise or a joint cooperative exercise was all that remained between the agreement that Khurshid had negotiated. He negotiated very little with India. He negotiated with the Pakistan army. He negotiated with the Pakistan establishment. He went out to the Pakistan people. He told them that this is in our interest. And everybody came around to the view that yes, it is in Pakistan's interest. And therefore, progress was possible. On the Indian side, Dr. Manmohan Singh was relentless in refusing to say a single hostile word about Pakistan. Never said anything wrong. He just hoped that the back channel would work sufficiently quickly for him to be able to go to Pakistan and show that there was genuine progress being made. And you don't get genuine progress by getting onto a bus in Amritsar and then not being received by the three chiefs in Islamabad, which is what happened. You don't get peace by heads of government personalizing foreign policy. In fact, one of my favorite stories about Khurshid is that when he came to India as foreign minister, just after I'd become Minister of Petroleum, I asked him whether he could smuggle a few sentences into the joint communique about the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline for gas that I was busily maneuvering in India. So Khurshid said, draft a few lines, I look at it. So I drafted a few lines, I showed it to him. He said, I have no problem with this, but you'll have to sell it to Riaz Khokhar. So I said, I have to sell it to Riaz Khokhar? He's your foreign secretary. And Khurshid said, that may be, but he's your friend. And that's how we got those lines into the joint communique. That is the kind of relationship we need to move forward. He gave me the most difficult task that he had some doubt that he would be able to carry out. And I read the lines to Riaz. He inverted their order, but all the words were the same. And I said to him, you're a genius, you write English so well. And we move forward. So therefore, what is the lesson to be drawn? The lesson to be drawn is that we must begin to talk, but the talks must be uninterrupted and uninterruptible. Until we arrive at that formula, we are not going to be able to move forward. Because the problems between us are highly complex, they are numerous, they affect virtually every aspect of our lives. And it is effectively like asking two parents who got divorced 70 years ago to start making love in their 8th decade. I mean, that's very difficult to do. There are too many differences. But if you sit down and there's a process of reconciliation, then we should be able to move forward provided it is kept secret. And there are two historical examples which I would like to share with you in conclusion. The first is the example of Vietnam. As it happened, since I was in the Foreign Service, I was posted to Hanoi in the middle of the bombing by the Americans of Vietnam. But I was a social pariah there. Because on the day that I was reaching Hanoi, Lyndon Johnson, to get Hubert Humphrey elected, declared a total bombing halt over North Vietnam. So I was the only diplomat in Hanoi whom the Americans had not attempted to kill. This is a very awkward position to be in, but there I was. But it gave me a ringside view on the commencement of the talks at the Hotel Majestic in Paris, where every Thursday, whether they had anything to say to each other or not, whether there was going to be any progress or not, whether there was going to be a blacksliding or not, every Thursday, the representatives of North Vietnam and of the United States of America met, and while they were meeting, the principals would wander around the world trying to establish that there is a process on which should lead to success. And then came December 1972, when what is notoriously known as the Christmas bombings by Nixon took place. And in those Christmas bombings, the Americans dropped more tonnage over little North Vietnam than both the Allies and the Axis powers had dropped over Europe during the Second World War. In 2 weeks, there was more tonnage that was dropped. The talks were not disrupted. The result? In January of 1973, they moved to an agreement which gave Henry Kissinger a Nobel Prize that he undeservedly picked up, and Le Duc Tho, the Vietnamese, a Nobel Prize which he angrily refused to take. And by 1975, the American will had been broken, Vietnam was reunified, and today America's best friend in Southeast Asia is the same Hanoi, is the same Vietnam that they fought over. The second example, which is a particular favorite of mine, is what's currently happening in Korea. When you see, a man who was being dismissed as mad only a few days ago, this Kim, I can't get his name, Kim Song-un, I think his name is, Kim Jong-un. Then Mr. Un steps over a very low kind of wall in the village of Panmunjom, which they call the village of peace. He steps over it into South Korea, and Mr. Moon steps across the same barrier into North Korea. And they hold hands, they talk to each other, and an entire era of hostility is just wiped out. Which is why I've always said that these uninterrupted and uninterruptible talks between India and Pakistan cannot take place in Islamabad and cannot take place in Delhi. Because if they did, one or the other side would stop it, saying it's inconvenient to come. But if we were to do what the Koreans have done for the last, how many years is it? Your mathematicians, 1953 till today, that's about 60 years, 65 years. They've laid a table across the ceasefire line in Panmunjom village so that the North Vietnamese don't have to leave North Vietnam to sit down at the table, and the South Vietnamese Koreans don't have to leave South Korea to sit at the table. And then they talk to each other. So if we were to lay the table at the border, the no man's land, between Pakistan and India, then the Pakistanis would still be in Pakistan, so they don't need Indian permission. And the Indians would still be in India because they don't need permission. So let's talk and have an absolutely open-ended agenda that either side can bring up any subject that it wants. And day after day, Thursday after Thursday, you will be bringing up Kashmir. And Thursday after Thursday, we'll bring up terrorism. But in the meanwhile, there'll be other issues that will get discussed as well. And if Khurshid could organize a conclusion on Kashmir, I think we could organize a conclusion on terrorism. But we can't do it if we don't talk. In fact, it was when Khurshid was the foreign minister of Pakistan that it was agreed between the two heads that we'd have an anti-terrorism mechanism. Unfortunately, they called it ATM, and so we're still pressing buttons hoping that some money will come out. But the ATM in our case stood for anti-terrorism mechanism. It was not operationalized, never has been. And yet that is, I think, the one way in which we can deal with our concerns. And as for Kashmir, please talk Kashmir till you're blue in the face. A complete open invitation to you. I think one of the things you'll discover is that in our part of Kashmir, which you like to call Indian-held Kashmir, apart from Syed Jilani, there's no one who wants to join Pakistan. They want Azadi. And I suspect from the long conversations I used to have more than 35 years ago with Amanullah in Karachi of the J&K liberation movement, that he too didn't want to be in Pakistan, he wanted Azadi. And what they have said in point number 1 is that there is no question of independence for Jammu Kashmir. There's also no question of exchanging territories or exchanging peoples. But we should work towards rendering the line of control completely irrelevant by enabling full-scale crossing of the LOC by Kashmiris from both sides, so that the emotional integrity, the cultural integrity, the family integrities of those who are suffering the burden of separation is removed from them. And then there were other points that I don't need to go into now. But since Khurshid has blazed the way and shown that in 4 years of intensive discourse, it's possible to arrive to make so much progress, I'm confident that if we picked up the Khurshid formula, we can't pick up the Pervez Musharraf formula, because now that Pervez Musharraf wants to get back into legitimate politics in Pakistan, he is beginning to disown the 4 points, which is a great shame, but he is. And the successor governments in Pakistan want to so bury the Khurshid legacy that they don't accept that these documents are even lying in the Foreign Office. But who cares? My government is the same. They can't bear the name of Nehru, they hate the name of Gandhi's. They are trying to steal Mahatma Gandhi, who said that Jinnah is the Qaid-e-Azam. These people think that they can draw a blind over history. They're completely wrong. I'm sure that since Khurshid did it, it can be done again. It took him 4 years, we can do it again in 4 weeks. Because what they said was the only sensible path forward. And if we can start addressing these really difficult questions in an uninterrupted and uninterruptible dialogue, I'm absolutely sure that victory will be ours. It will not be mine. It will certainly not be yours. It will be valid only if both of us feel we've won and none of us feel we've lost. I've just quoted Khurshid Mahmud Kasuri to you, in case you think I was quoting Gautam Buddha. Thank you very much. Bharat Zindabad, Pakistan Paindabad.
Thank you, Maniji. That was brilliant, powerful, eloquent, well argued. And you have certainly made an impact over here. Before we go on to the question and answers, I would like to ask people over here, for my edification and Mani's, how many people here have heard an Indian speak in Pakistan? Here? You have? Okay, so something like 6 people in this audience have heard an Indian speak, and the rest, maybe 200, have not. So what you were saying is absolutely correct, and in fact, I'll tell you that when I went to India, and I went to a lot of schools and colleges and universities over there, and particularly in the schools, and when I spoke to them about basic science or about India, Pakistan or whatever, at the end they would ask, "Sir, are you really from Pakistan?" So I said, "Yes." So they then actually come and touch me to see if I'm for real. Now that is the level of ignorance, the difference, the divisions that have been created between our two peoples, and it's such a crying shame. Thank you again, Maniji, for this wonderful talk, and now for the question and answers.
Sorry, I had very poor hearing, so it may be necessary that after you ask the question, he gives me a summary.
Okay. Yeah.